Hey everybody, welcome. It's rush hour here. I don't know how much of the background noise the machine in my hand picks up. Huh. Sun is going down. I've chased so many threads since my last video. I think I may have solved a mystery involving the meaningful sudden appearance of a lot of modestly anomalous coyote poop around the garden. Looks like during the season they eat, at least around here, but not just here. They eat cherry-like fruits in pretty good quantity, and judging from what I observed, it looks like it's really good for their digestive tract. I think today I've got time on my mind. And I'm just recognizing something I've long been familiar with, but it's elusive. So what I mean by that is our common experience of time has collapsed into representations and metrics, right? So that we're inclined to think that this word and idea refer to primarily a quantitative metric by which we measure this kind of interval. Sorry, I'm just laughing at something on the ground. Maybe it's worth showing. So here is a large pile of dirt. And here is somebody's response to the large pile of dirt. It's a pretty good response. I like it. Blatant, unexpected affirmation of terrain features. But of course, a really big pile of dirt, for anyone creative enough to make use of it, is a lot of fun. You can slide down that thing and get filled with dirt. And we're sort of in the children's area of the garden, so I think they're encouraging kids to play in the dirt, which is an idea that I like a lot. Yep, there's more signs. So you can see by what just happened, which was completely unplanned by me, that the quality of temporality, in my experience, changed dramatically. I encountered a signal from others, right, from another time, right? Someone wrote that in another time, and that signal crossed over not just the time gap between them writing it and me encountering it, not just the space gap, but some unusual intervals in there For example, the between of minds, and even, the the aspect of our awareness with which we sense and respond to humor. And so I was being rather didactic and blundering along when my sort of didactic blundering was suddenly interrupted by play. And that's a refreshing moment. But you can see that what was going on, it wasn't about the size or the smallness of the intervals, right? It became about relational qualities shared across many kinds of intervals, openings, spaces, gaps. Right? And we can think about very ordinary things, and if we're attentive or curious, or both, or more, something very peculiar emerges about time. And this is one of my deeply favorite topics because it's something that most of us moderns are almost completely estranged from in terms of how we think about time, how we conceptualize it, and how we relate with that conceptualization, because time's a really important thing. If you get that one messed up or it's too collapsed, pretty tough to get anything else right. And the collapse of our relationships with and understandings of time is both one of the most tragic impoverishments of our modernity, and at the same time, an area of our human ideation and thought and concern where we can rapidly recover assets if we're so inclined, particularly if someone whose understanding is broader or older can hold our hand and sort of give us an emulation model and candidate anyway, and guide us through the process of seeing what the collapse into representation over the cognitive evolution of our species, what that collapse threw away, defected from, occluded, so on and so forth. So it is incredibly tragic, the really impoverished remnants of our conceptual thought and relation and expectations about time, because our model of temporality conditions and invokes those expectations. And when the model is so impoverished that there's no kind of living oxygen in it at all, no space to inhabit, no play, right? Just seconds become minutes. I'm leaving a little offering for my Blue Jay friends and others. Oh, there they are. Good. Yeah, they know to kind of keep an eye out for me, right? Let's see what's going to happen here. So usually one of the things that happens is a lot of caching. Right? Okay, so there goes a caching moment. Now notice how the intervals, seconds and minutes, They change. There's a rhythm. What we're relating with changes the whole quality of our temporal experience and how we're in that experience and why. So it was curious about the other pile of granola and sunflower seeds. And it's got a little throat pouch. And it's filling that pouch and maybe eating a couple of, pieces. And then caching them, pulling them from the pouch and caching them. And you can see here a really sophisticated relationship with time. The human timeline meets the blue jay timeline, meets the ancient evolution of relationships between our species. The entire cognitive history of humans up to 2020 meets, the entire cognitive history of the blue jays circa 2020. And there's a transfer, there's something shared. And that sharing is perhaps the most significant secret that underlies time. When two of us come together, if I encounter someone and we're together and speaking or learning or playing, exploring, trying to help each other, or fighting, or whatever it is that's going on, you can see how the fact that we come together in time, in space, it changes everything that's going on locally. It changes who I am, who I will become, how I will see, think, what I may know, what I'll ignore. We modulate relationally with great sensitivity, even if we're sort of trapped in a familiar pattern. So we have all kinds of common everyday experiences that change time. Being isolated is a particularly challenging form of where temporality loses the depth and breadth of its relational diversity. The kinds of betweens that get included and across which transfers occur, and there's exchange, there's mutual enthusiasm, there's nurturing, all of the sort of the best stuff of our humanity. So we have common experiences though, like the experience of preparing food. It's a very particular way of being in time. And the others who may be involved are certainly included in that. To leave, unmentioned the actual lives of the beings we consume when we eat food. Eating food, profound transformation of the nature of temporality. I think most of us will be familiar to varying degrees of the very peculiar transformations in our experience of time that happen in, oh good, there's some sparrows are getting in on the game here. Oh, yep, both blue jays are here now. See, there's like a party here. It's crazy. There's hummingbirds getting in on the game. With the inclusion of the living world in my incredibly humble little experiment here, you can see how the local temporality, not just me, not just my experience of time, but a number of creatures around here, including plants and, microbiota, right? There are now sort of coated granola seeds stuck in the ground, and there's bacteria in there, right? So by this little, very modest food offering, a web of relationships has arisen and is now transforming and including new organisms and, new potentials for transformation and outcome. And there's a message in sharing food. Hi. Oh, by all means. This? Yeah. Yeah. What is it? Do you know?
Red color of yellow. I would like a shirt that color.
It is a nice color. There again, right? We're in one sort of manifold of relational temporalities, and I'm speaking, right? But an actual human being comes along, and that transforms, and we change each other, and we transform together in time, right? That's not the same as counting seconds on a watch. It has nothing really to do with that at all. And in fact, the idea, you can see that our idea of time, it's not encompassing anything, right? It doesn't bring us insight and opportunity. Instead, it sort of paints a dead landscape of, moment after moment after, like this kind of drudgery, yeah, of counting. And it's not that the counting has no value, it's that if our ideas about time collapse into that, I think we're ruined, essentially. Not just intellectually, but something about our soul gets, shrivels up under the harsh light of the clock. Yeah. But it comes back to life in the bluish light of the rising sun. Yeah. And it transforms in the reddish light of the setting sun, and in the moonlight, and in the starlight, and in the darkness. So it transforms in living places where time has a heartbeat. Time has infinite heartbeats, right? And there's a local field of those heartbeats, but those go back to the beginning of life on Earth. And so there really can be understood and felt to directly embody right here now the entire landscape of the evolution of living beings and their relationships on Earth. And that playground is incredibly, just fertilely exploding with flowers of intelligence and opportunity and profound, deep relation, awakening. Unblinding. So there's all these peculiar, I'm bird walking in circles here, but there's all these little peculiar things in our ordinary lives, right? There's a unexpectedly deep transformation in our lived experience of time when we are engaged in particular activities. Obviously, me making a video is radically alters where I'm at, even where I'm at in my body, sort of where I'm most localized, or where I'm tense, or where I'm compressed, or where I'm open. But for example, most people know that when we go so look, if I'm going to go use the restroom, time is going to change in there. That's a completely different context and activity, and it's very personal, and it's also very casual, mostly, I think. So there's a place where the temporality suddenly shifts, right? We walk through the door of the bathroom, we sit down, in this case, and there's a different species of time that happens there. And the same is true if I'm washing my hands, or particularly if I'm in the shower, right? We have this trope that we call shower thoughts, meaning, my mind is different when I'm in the shower, and time is different. Yes, the clock still keeps going outside, right? Tick tock, tick tock. I get that. But that's a lot less interesting than it appears. Washing the dishes, very different experience of time. Doing something distracting, like playing a video game, watching a movie, watching a television show, flipping through some, social media nonsense for an hour. There's the metric, right? All of these things change us, some more than others, though. The eating, going to the bathroom, any kind of intimate relation with another human being, or a plant, or an animal, or a group of animals, right? Imagine if you were relating with a group of raccoons. It's not ordinary time. That's not tick tock, tick tock, tick tock. Yes, tick tock, tick tock still going on, but it's nothing like what happens. What if you were with a pod of dolphins? What if you were put up against the wall to be executed in a fascist dictatorship? See how time is the context absolutely transforms the content. And I think we fail to understand just how complex the content is. Because if we even begin to think about it with modest care, right? What immediately springs to awareness are like these hyperstructures of relationships over time and space and being, and perhaps origin, right? Soul, spirit. Though those words are terribly value laden in our time. Going into a store, right? Go into any business, right? At all. Anything. Post office, restaurant, Costco, the grocery store, a dentist's office. Right? It's almost like entering another universe. Right? The nature, the quality, the content of time is intentionally transformed. And it's transformed in each of those cases to facilitate relational outcomes. It's kind of what business is, actually. Or more often in commerce, representations, right, of relational outcomes. But if you really want to experience a very complex temporal transformation, just leave your house, get in a car, and drive somewhere. Now, you're radically transforming your relationship with time and location over time, right? So there's some kind of equation there. But that's a completely unique aspect of human technological confusion that dispenses with the intimacy one would otherwise have between origin, destination, path, right? Radically alters all of that from the get-go into structures, right? The machine, just get over the terrain as quickly as you can, right? Skip the relationship, right? And then get the token reward, which is at the end, which is like how to put it? You get the goal delivered without the intervening intimacies. And without those intervening intimacies, the goal is different. It's less rewarding, right? Interesting. It's less rich because your path to it was less rich, right? A long time ago, well, when I was a child, even when I was a teenager and so on, young adult, to learn what books you could get, you could go to libraries, or you could look at this thing called books in print that really didn't have much of a description of the book at all. So there was this quest involved, right, where you had to traverse a bunch of paths to acquire a book. And by the time you acquired a book, or I did, there was this really profoundly personal web of relational connotations involved in my inner unspoken feelings about the book, right? It became really an intimate thing, in the sense that it was wow, it's hard to make useful language about this. It was a partly sacred expression of my own interiorities, my character. And because I had guests, it was also a display object, right? Guests would come over, see my bookshelves. I would go to their house, see their bookshelves, physically, right? So throwing away the relationship isn't, well, let's just say that for the gains in apparent convenience, if we understood what was involved, we might often resist making the trade. I think intelligently so. So yeah, get in a car, travel, completely different relationship with time, location, space, self, right? One's either pilot or passenger these days. That could all change. Looks like it's changing in ways I find relatively confused, but interesting nonetheless. So yeah, you could see that like the next step in the evolution of that, of time collapsing that way, right, into convenience, which is everywhere we look. And what that really means is relationships collapsing into tokens and representations. And so the next evolution of the car, right, what do we lose and what do we gain? Well, we lose human-directed path orientation and transit, right? So now, or not human assisted, human, controlled, right? So we lose that, although the humans don't control everything because the paths are sort of set out in pavements, this kind of thing, right? So it's just going to go to the next phase where now the human's not involved in piloting the car, so they're not even going to have that degree of relationship with the transit, the between place, right? And could, the driver can sleep, or people can do other things. One wonders what exactly, I can imagine lots of things that happen if you don't have to drive the car. But there's a bunch of things that go away. And some of them are cognitive. Because memory and path transit in physical space are deeply related. And so if we're not exercising those assets correctly, or constantly, in an embodied way, not just in a thinky way, it's going to affect things like memory, right? And it seems already there are effects from cognitive deficits and such. In fact, I think it's blatantly obvious that this is so, but from our relationships with machines, which, once again, transform time. And they collapse a broad jungle of possible relational manifolds over time into things like texts, or, hopefully maybe a phone call or something. And in-person meetings and so on, less so these days. The subtle flowing of the leaves in the wind. There's a physical music of transformation over time and of relation, right? The oxygen, the wind, the living place, the histories, right? Replaying this ancient music of the movement of the plants in the breeze. We moderns have probably lost, many of us anyway, the association between the breeze and the soul. Right? It brings the plants into this musical, incredibly beautiful and nurturing movement that's absent inside the boxes we live in, where for most of us, mostly nothing moves except on screens. And that's a time cage. In a sense, if the home is not enlivened by relationships, right, it becomes prison-like. And this is part of why the idea of individuals is a little bit wonky, and it's unimaginable from the perspective of temporality. It's just not. It's not real. For all kinds of unusually unexpected reasons that I'll refrain from detailing at the moment. I think these are agave plants. And here's a a garden spider. And you can see how the spider in the web is this incredible metaphor of temporality. It's sifting that wind spirit, right, over time for food and other things. I mean, there's a lot going on that isn't just, right? We don't merely eat. And I think we may have preserved this confused idea that animals just eat and, go to the bathroom or something. Not what's going on. Definitely not what's going on with spiders. And while I was showing the plant, a lot of the local birds were engaged in evening chorus relation. Another layer of time. You can see all these layers, right? And they're all together in the tick-tock, in the second hand thing, or the minute hand, or the hour hand, or the day, or whatever interval we pick. They're all together. But there's uniquely distinguishable layers of relational temporality, infinite layers of them, inconceivable. If we go down to the size of the cell, this is a universe of relational symphony in the body of time, right? Investing that body with endless symphonies of rich, complex transfers, communication, relationship, togetherness. And each organism is a unique musician in that symphony. Right? And they can't be abstracted from it except in thought. There's no other way to get out from the actual. I think, in many ways, us moderns, our worldview requires that we hide literally from the kinds of awareness and concern and way of being in the world that I'm, orbiting here. Because it is, at first glance, it completely overwhelms the idea of human thought's sort of mastery over structure, right? Over models, ideas, concepts, and we remake the world in the image of these incredibly limiting, narrow, disoriented, fundamental perspectives. So, relationships over time, embodied in the living being's form, right? These trees. Some of them 60 years old. It's a young garden. So I think that the worldviews that are common are so narrow and limiting that we recoil from the actual nature of temporality into their kind of collapsed, seemingly controllable structure, right? It's something when we walk using a prosthesis. The prosthesis eventually sort of occludes the walking. We're no longer in contact with what we're walking about. There's an analogy here to what's referred to as the complex plane in mathematics. And I'm really just playing with the very surface of the topic because the underlying complexity is very difficult to approach in regular language. There's a meaning of being individual that's useful. If I think of myself as a local bubble of presence in time, right, in physical temporality, then if I think of all of the other beings who can be seen as individuals, humans and plants in this tree and so on, the bird, then there's this bubble universe where when we come back together in time and space, when we reunite, when there's reunion, then there's an incredible benefit that's shared among the participants. But it's very difficult to speak about this literally. I think it's the kind of thing that parables would be much more suited to. And the aspect of my imagination with which I craft them is not currently online. So, here, if I can point this out, let's see, what's going on here? Okay. So that's a chrysalis of a pipevine swallowtail butterfly. And this is what pipevine looks like. And here you can see that there have been caterpillars. They're very exotic, black with soft spines and orange spots. Gorgeous creatures. Voracious too. But the chrysalis, which you can see another one here. Oh, yeah, there's a few. Here's one. And here's another one. Spiders sometimes spin webs around the chrysalises, which you can see is a temporalized relationship, right? They're not going to get anything at all from making that web today, and they may never get anything. But it's conceivable that one day they will. Those chrysalises, they're crucibles of seemingly impossible transformation. I don't know exactly what goes on in there, but I'm pretty sure that a lot of the time there's at least one phase where the solid animal has turned mostly just to goop, right? It's completely lost any semblance of formal structure in there, even though there's surely there are sort of organ-like precursors in the mass and things like this. Probably the cells sort of know what they're doing, right? But yeah, that stuff just turns into goop, right? It loses all of its structure, and then, you know, restructures. And here we have a parable that maybe is useful, right? That creature dissolves into unformed, sort of origin-y goo, and then restructures itself. Like, that form of time is astonishing. It's reiterating a process much older than the flat time we're used to thinking in. Much older. Because it's happened in a trillion moths and butterflies. And other creatures who transform. Right? Lots of creatures transform. And of course, at each scale of life, if there is a pace, right, a speed of life, it's radically different according to organisms and size. A minute for a virus or a cell is nothing like a minute for a human, except that the human is composed of trillions of viruses and cells. So there's this really sophisticated interplay of temporal rhythm, right, or pace, that a second for me is not a second for you. Like there's a domain and there's a layer in which that seems, you know, obviously a fact, but there are endless other layers in which it's not a fact, right? More time. So there's this infinite manifold of living temporalities all around and within us, anciently related to the origins of time, space, and the origins of life on Earth, and the origins of intelligence. But our ideas about time mostly lock us out of that. And actually, you know, our ideas about time inform our ideas about identity. What is meaningful, what is true, what is good, what is false. So if you get the wrong idea about something, or if you get a bad idea, right, a too poorly articulated idea, or one that keeps collapsing into representations, either of those is catastrophe on legs, then we find ourselves evicted from the profoundly accessible beauty and terror of beauty that is really, I think, something our distant ancestors could not have survived without it. Right? We're like the space creatures of our distant ancestors cognitively. We're living in all these domains where there's no oxygen, right? And we're carrying representations on our backs, sort of, to, you know, to cross the gaps that otherwise we would be drawn to and across freely in relation and wonder and reunion. And these are our natural, you know, assets. It's just they've been replaced by all of this kind of tokeny, metric-y accounting crap. And it's okay if we have the accounting crap, but let's not trade the representation for its origin, because we'll lose our minds, or what's left of them. There's so much more to tell. There's so much more to explore about time. But I hope I've piqued your curiosity, because when I hear my species talking about time, with nearly no exceptions, they're actually not talking about time. They're talking about an overlay they invented to torture each other with, and everything else too, pretty much. A moment of quiet. I've heard new songs in the birds. I've heard new singers that I've not heard before around here. Some are old and familiar, some are entirely novel. The cycles of waking and dreaming, thought and non-thought, activity and rest, reflection and distraction. The cycles of our heartbeats, our breathing, our metabolic activity. Each of the organs transforming what it does under different circumstances. Each of our organs not doing one thing or being one thing, but being a matrix of powers of transformation, right? Oxygenating the blood, cleaning the blood. But these mechanical descriptions belie the sophistication of what they refer to, in the same way that our mechanical description of time belies the endless universe of temporalities that we're born to navigate in. We know these temporalities. They are our ancestral companions. Perhaps we can continue together to look upon these mysteries with the awe and reverence our ancient ancestors did. And we did as children ourselves. Perhaps we can remember the beautiful mystery of individuation and reunion. Thanks for joining me. Bye for now.